It's been my pleasure to be present here, and thank you, Bogdan, for hosting this. So, if you would like, I could start with a very brief information package of who I am, what I do, and why I'm here, and what I will talk about, and how that will impact the topic would impact our existing businesses today. I explicitly wanted to choose a topic that is very relevant on a daily basis. This is especially at the time of COVID, where we have significant uncertainty on what would be the next big thing. Many corporations, many startups even are looking into cost reduction by laying off, by reducing some of the project funding, by removing innovation budgets. And at the same time, you would have many firms who take this as an opportunity to create new products on distributed ledgers with machine learning, with combinatorial technologies to create new products and go to market. So I won't talk about cost reduction. That is something that's off the shelf, readily available knowledge, but I will talk about how you can have new ideas at a time of uncertainty and have that put into work. But I think, Bogdan, you touched a very interesting point today. What you said previously about why does it not work sometimes with corporations when you have a blockchain implementation, you have a great idea, you have a good scope of view of things in the organization, or you basically want to launch something just brand new, not touching anything of the legacy operations. And then suddenly it just happens to be, it doesn't work. These are all the things that we will also touch into in our next 25 minutes, I believe, as 2 minutes delay in joining due to technical difficulties. So starting off with who I am an expert at the United Nations CFAC, Trade Facilitation Council. I work as a consultant for over a decade. My specialty and focus area has been on emerging technologies. I look into new technologies. I assess the applicability of those technologies in our existing business operations. And I look into either using those technologies as a means to make things better, meaning how can we make things more efficient or more cost efficient, or I look into how we can take these technologies and apply it to our everyday business and build new products, new services, and new markets. So that being said, I spent a decade in this business. I've worked with several firms, 2 of the major consulting firms, and also worked as a strategy lead to design new products and help assist our clients take these ideas to production level deployments. How I came to blockchain is that I'm an electrical engineer by profession. I studied electrical engineering. I love the lab. I actually have my lab sitting right behind me as we speak. I've been lucky enough to be one of the first people to be introduced to blockchain, Bitcoins. And since then, I kept my sincere interest in cryptography, and even today. And hence, I've been involved in the very, very early days. I went up to the Mt. Gox era, and then I stepped out of the Bitcoin scene. But I've always been involved in the enterprise applications of distributed ledgers, which pretty much blended my hobby as a technologist with what I do at work as a strategist, as a consultant. So that all being said, the topic of today's talk is tapping into new revenue streams with a blue ocean strategy. So a lot of terms in there, but what we're basically saying is today, the crypto scene, in my humble view, is not performing the way it performed in September 2017. Many crypto coins at the time were booming. People had quite esteemed view that things will go right and crypto coins will all survive. It didn't. Many of the startups that we saw in the 2017 days don't exist today. Some of the people who had led such initiatives of new crypto coins are no longer with us in these firms, and they have joined even corporate structures. They work for the big 4 in consulting firms, in IT firms, and they've simply disappeared. And some of these coins even had not only disappeared, but they've literally vanished. Vanished meaning they promised and they didn't deliver, and people put their money in there. So it was a pretty big shock for many people when people started to get the feeling, is it a hoax or is it for real? Well, on the other hand, Bitcoin did survive, so the distributed ledger principles that we apply in the enterprise scene. So all the way today, until the time of COVID in February, things were going pretty much as expected. So we saw quite a few technologies emerge and develop themselves for enterprise use in parallel. And we saw major financial institutions, insurers, healthcare provider, life sciences companies, even telecommunications business started using distributed ledgers for various operations. This could be their finance operations, this could be their payments, this could be basic logging of documentation, or security practice, even for military use, was out there until February. What happened in February was basically when all the singing and the dancing ends, what happens? The music wasn't playing anymore. And we saw quite a few startups simply say, we don't have the money or the runway anymore to continue what we do and develop a product. And we either lay off or we simply shut down the firm and liquidate. This is exactly what happened in the beginning of March, April, June, May, June. And unfortunately, a big blow has been dealt to the startup scene on distributed ledgers. That all being said, the major players have always stayed strong as they have corporate backing and they have sufficient funding, albeit not as strong, in my view, as it did before. And that all being said, around my midsummer, my understanding was some of these startups have looked into how can we create new products with the changing market, and how can we create new offerings that will relate to the COVID and a volatile market. Well, this is nice buzzwords, but in practicality, what it means is, can we create anything to trace objects or people such that we know if there's any contact with a COVID patient, we can bring that into use? Or can we use the market volatility to our advantage and the market rally to our advantage and create new tokens that would be relevant to either an asset, that will be linked to an asset, or that would be a service that we will provide, like a utility token, in relation to the COVID scene. So this, of course, came with many ideas that were being discussed. Quite a few startups came up with their innovative thinking, interesting use cases. Some of them relevant to the market, some of them just a nebula cloud, nowhere close to being a real business idea. But some of those have been eliminated over time in a very short time, in a couple of months' time, to 1 2 months' time. And by now, we now have the major question in the minds of the startups, which is, how can I bring my idea to real deployment at a time when investors are thinking, well, I have money, but I don't know where to invest. I buy property. I may go into the rallying stock market, though it's slightly risky, especially these days, and specifically this week. And how can we use that funding to fuel a good idea such that we have significant returns and a possible exit plan in 5 to 7 years? That being said, startups not always know how to go to market and create a new product. So the initial question in people's minds were, how can we create a roadmap that will be convincing investors, that we can create a product and roll out and successfully get enough market traction for a break even in the next 3 to 5 years? Well, this is the focus of our today's discussion. I've already given you quite a brief and background information on what this is all about, but I will basically, for the remaining time of the talk, I will be giving you some of the key principles on how to make that business work and how you could use your knowledge of your asset, your customer, the market, to verify whether what you want to build makes sense, and how you can take the very first baby steps into making your idea come to fruition and come to truth. Typically, what we've done so far was that people had a good idea. They said, well, I'll create a smart contract. That was a new idea back in the time when we worked with Bitcoins. And smart contracts were already in there, but using token with a smart contract wasn't. So people said, well, if I were to build this, would people pay for it? And if I were to ask investors to put money in this, how can I justify the money that they put in will have a return? How can I guarantee at least identify the right risks and draw a plan around it? So in this sentence, if you look at it, there's 3 words that are important. One of them is a risk, basically for both the startup employees, the owners, as well as the investors. There's a significant risk of not being successful. So the very first thing that needs to be assessed is identifying what risks you will encounter on the way to building your first prototype. Meaning, if you'd like to build a new product on a distributed, that would not that will be a roadblock that would prevent me from launching my product as I wish it to be. Let's say if I'd like to make a new toothbrush, I would first want to know, will actually people use it? Or what would prevent me from making that toothbrush? Or what external factors, such as competitors, would play in making my toothbrush the ultimate toothbrush of the world? So now let's double click on this. Let's zoom into a real case. So when I look at a startup today, there was a very interesting startup, a gin startup, literally making bottles of gin. And we were assessing the case of whether this gin startup could be successful. So we first looked into the risks of the startup, what risks they will entail. So one of them is regulatory risk. There's, of course, there's inside and outside view of things. So we both assessed both of them in a very comprehensive fashion, although I'm mentioning it in a few seconds. And we looked into the risks that would come from external factors, such as what if the competitors also play a similar product. So this gin, for example, was very specific, this unique selling proposition. So this is another keyword to bear in mind, a unique selling proposition. Why would they buy yours? Was that it was local, it was handmade, it was custom bottles, it was only a few batches, it was only sold in exquisite locations in high streets? Well, that's perfect. But what if someone else comes up with the same idea, or a large corporation who is already in this business, which has a scale of operations to make this more efficient than you, actually step in there? And how can you create yourself a unique product? So this is how you can identify. First, you need to identify your risks. Second, you need to identify your unique selling proposition. And you need to be very, very negative, so to say, of seeing all the risks that would come, all the roadblocks you would encounter, all the challenges you will see in making this real. And you shouldn't take it as your baby. You should take it as someone else's baby, so to say. You could actually bash at it rather than try to protect it. And perhaps the most difficult part for a blue ocean strategy of going in a new market, releasing a new product is, well, of course, gin is not a blue ocean strategy. Gin is everybody's making gin. It takes a day to get equipment, and then you will easily make it. But the first thing you need to see is, if it's the market that is a red ocean that you'll need to fight against, what are the risks? And the same applies for the blue ocean strategy. If you go in there and build the first product, who else would actually try to target your segment? So let's take an example that is more blue ocean. Recently talking to another startup that is looking into building smart homes, but smart homes, not like turn on the lights, but smart homes as it learns the way you act, and it helps you to do your daily tasks itself. Basically, I'm sure some of you have seen these electric vacuum cleaners where they just roam around your home. They simply suck off any dirt. They have some learning capability. They would know where they bumped. They would keep maps of your residence, but they would not likely start when you leave home automatically unless you enable this option on your phone. So many of the things that smart and automated homes do are things that we enable, or things that we authorize, or things that we put into as programming. Basically, start my vacuum cleaner 9 a.m. in the morning every day. Or if I leave home, please, dear IFTTT, if this and that protocol, please start the vacuum cleaner when I leave home. But it doesn't actually learn itself. It doesn't watch you starting your vacuum cleaner when you lock the door and leave. And if you actually did this every time, and if you had sensors watching you, a camera, some motion sensors, definitely audio recordings, then it would understand whether you're leaving home and right after the action you take after the other. So locking the door, or one step before locking the door, starting a vacuum cleaner, locking your door, taking the elevator downstairs to leave your residence. Well, that was a blue ocean, complete blue ocean. Nobody actually had the idea to go in that direction so far in this level of extent that they would like to do. And very few people had the knowledge of using machine learning to such an extent that even the way you talk at home is identified by your own hosted systems, such that it would tell you, well, Burak is angry today, so why don't we actually get him a drink? Which was a very interesting, actually, in 2000, in Expo Hamburg in 2000, there was a bar, automated bar, that mixes a drink for you based on what it thinks your mood is. So bringing all these technologies together is new. There is no such market. There is no other competitor that's out there that's doing this. And this was a complete blue ocean. So there was no distributed ledger in this, but it was also quite interesting to see how you could create a digital identity of yourself that is DLT based, that's going to be integrated in it. All of these are great ideas, right? I love the idea of everything automated. The only challenge there collaboration in a non-competitive market of creating a product? Well, we said identify the risks. So if something is recording everything I do, I would have a definite regulatory risk. Where's the data stored? How is the data processed? Is it actually leaving my residence? Is it going to a backend of some IT company? That was, for example, one thing, and many other risks that came with it. And they all had to be identified. What if everything malfunctions? What if you turn on the electricity at a time when you shouldn't? So these are some IT risks and technical risks along with it that all went together. And secondly, once the risks were identified, there was a very good competitive analysis. So nobody's in there yet, but who could step into this world? So if you're using Alexa or Google Home or Siri or any other application today, they already have taken a step in, or Siemens automated houses, they would likely step in. So a good analysis of your competitors is the second thing that is very much essential. And that will tell you whether you should prepare against those entrants coming in by either creating entry barriers, by IP, by probably not by cost, because they already have a lot more money than you do as a startup owner. And you would likely need to have a clear roadmap of execution that would likely be more agile than a large corporation, so that you would probably get there before they do. Even if they put all the money, they probably won't get the speed, which you can if you have the right people and a team and the ambience, so to say, of people working together in collaboration. So that is very critical in building a complete blue ocean at a time of COVID, especially at a time of COVID, and especially when people are living in their homes, when people need a home automation as much as they can, not to do any menial housework. So that being said, another key challenge that needs to be addressed is your ability to turn things in a commercial engine. So in my previous conversation here, I was bringing up the idea of building platform businesses. So in the old days, I've just bought myself an iPad. I was just looking into photography applications. They were the one-time fee. I was paying $20. I have the app. I use it for life, and they have to give me updates. The problem there was I pay once a high amount, perfect, and the company's quite happy with the cash flow. That's the app developer, but they were not really happy with the fact that they have to keep on updating the app forever. So that's when we started to have recurring fees. So instead of paying 20, why don't you pay me one every month, and I'll keep you up for 20 months. And if you want to keep it longer, I'll be happy to update it, and I'll keep on having my cash flow, because cash is the king. And free cash flow is very important for any company, even for a startup, even if they are sitting on cash to build a software. So that model has changed. So you must make sure that you have a business model that is not dating back to the 1990s. So you can't just build once and move on and hope that everybody will keep on buying another version of your product. So you have to make sure that you are either relying on building a platform business, or you're building a subscription-based model, which makes sense for the end user. So today on my iPad, pretty much every application I've seen was on a subscription basis. I have to pay a monthly fee as long as I use it. So for the user now, the question comes, am I getting a monthly benefit out of it, of using it? Because they can cancel at any time. And that's the risk that the subscription-based models see. So number 3 now is, let's say, going back to 38,000 feet, is that you need to build a strong business case behind it. Once you have a business case, you know your risks, you know your competitors. Now comes a technical assessment of the challenges, and that I won't go into, because that depends entirely on what you're going to build. If you're building a blockchain startup like we did back in the days, if you have a startup that relies on distributed ledger technology, you also have to take some technological risks into play. Not that long time back ago, quite a few firms had invested in using technology A or B, because large vendors such as Corda, there's Hyperledger, they actually were quite happy to promote their technologies. You have to make sure you're either being, let's say, interoperable with all, or you have to be betting on one and hope that things work. So that's the technology questions you should be asking yourself. Am I vendor agnostic? Do I have an Achilles heel that I'm only betting on single tech? Those are the things you need to keep in mind. And of course, once all this is set up, you need cash to make this work. And how do you go to investors? Well, investors want to know what they get in return. Investors may or may not love your technology, and personal delight is not one of the elements that they take into account when assessing your startup. What they will actually take into account is, if I'm putting $1 today, what return would I get from putting it in a bank? What return would I get in an offshore account? What return would I get in an S&P 500? Or if I'm investing my money into you, how do I exit, and how much do I get in return? So although it's your baby when you build your startup and you go into a complete blue ocean, you're going to build a new idea, you probably want to own the firm for life. Bear in mind, you might have to depart. And not only you, but also the investors may depart. So make sure that you actually put up a very clear exit strategy on day one onwards for anyone you're showing your deck to when you want to go on and build a new business model in there, startup in there. And a very feasible business model that will be providing free cash flows and preferably recurring revenue. And if you can build a platform business, all the better, but you would need a strong community to support that. So these are the very key elements that come on the top of my mind. Of course, we could put it in a more structured way as if it's like a lecture, and we could talk about the nice strategy slide of this, and this, and these are the analysis you need to do, and this is a SWOT. But I'll be skipping all those. I'll be looking into more hands-on practical experience of getting things done and how you could make your idea a reality. Now, going back, Bogdan made a pretty clear point. Why do companies and why do C-levels don't put everything into implementation? One thing I haven't mentioned is when you enter a new market with a new product, make sure that your team is intact. One of your biggest assets is your knowledge, internal knowledge. If half your people leave your company 6 months after you start, you probably won't make it. So it's always a good idea to share the power, or at least have mutual understanding between parties such that people actually stick to your idea and they want to drive it forward. So that's quite essential and important. It applies to enterprise. It applies to major deployments of distributed ledgers. It applies to small startups of 5 friends making gym together. Regardless, make sure that you have an intact team with aligned goals, and those goals not only, and your product is aligned with the customer. Hi, Bogdan. Now I see you.
Yeah, let me just recap. So your last thought is that you mean that on the other side there should be a person with the knowledge and who actually sticks to your idea, and that's how you get things going. Is that what you meant, or sorry?
I mean, this could range anything from having similar goals, similar ambitions, similar objectives, all the way to being good friends and having a beer together. So what is essential and necessary is that people that work with you or for you should have a similar vision of where they want to end up. Because if you don't have, keep that vision, people will drop off. And there is no way I can emphasize this more. Let's say 10 of the startups that I'm advising, almost half of them don't have that integrity. And I do know that in the next 6 months, they won't survive. Among those I have helped in the last 2 years, I could also say that they had not survived. So that's experience we know. Make sure that you have a shared common vision and make sure that your people are with you. And even if you're at a corporate setup, make sure that other stakeholders, people in the power map that are key players with you, are on board. And if they are not on board, your any strategy will never execute. And we've seen it the hard way.
Basically, to get things going, you always need to have interests aligned with each other. So you're absolutely
exactly. I mean, if we all should be going at least in the same direction or somewhere close by. So you don't have to come to the same end spot. You don't have to come to the last bus stop for me, but at least drop off somewhere close by. Don't drop off in the first stop, and make sure you're going in the right direction. Else you have to change the bus that day. And that means you're going to lose knowledge. That means you won't be able to deliver. That means you'll be late. And that means you won't make it on budget. So you need to verify this as a startup owner or an idea creator on day 1 and not on day 2.
Okay, Burak, thank you for having this speech.